The ship descended through clouds of purple gas, and Kate Morgan watched from her window as the alien world grew larger beneath her. She had spent 15 years preparing for this moment, first as a Marine, then as a diplomat, now as the first human ambassador to stand before the Galactic Conclave and ask for membership among the stars. The planet was called Prime, and it was the political center of 12 spacefaring civilizations. Massive cities stretched across continents of black rock and blue vegetation. Towers made of materials humans could not yet name reached toward 3 moons that hung in the orange sky. Everything about this world screamed power and age and superiority. Kate was not impressed. She had learned long ago that impressive things often hid weakness underneath. Lieutenant Commander Cole sat across from her in the shuttle. He was a good man with broad shoulders and a calm voice that had talked them out of trouble more than once during their journey across the galaxy. He had served with Kate for 3 years now, and he trusted her judgment even when he did not understand her plans. "You ready for this?" he asked. Kate turned from the window and looked at him. "I have been ready for this since I was 16 years old, and my father told me that humans would never reach the stars." Smiled, "Your father was wrong." "My father was wrong about many things. That is why I stopped listening to him." The shuttle landed on a platform made of polished stone. A delegation of soldiers waited for them outside. These creatures stood 12 feet tall with bodies covered in hard shells the color of dried blood. They had 4 arms each, and their heads were shaped like insects with compound eyes that reflected the light of the 3 moons. Kate had studied their biology during the long voyage. She knew that their exoskeletons could stop bullets and their claws could tear through steel. She also knew that they considered themselves the strongest species in the known galaxy. The lead soldier stepped forward and spoke in a clicking language that Kate's translator device rendered into English. "Ambassador Morgan, you will follow us to the Grand Chamber. The conclave awaits." Kate nodded and walked forward without hesitation, followed close behind. The soldiers surrounded them on all sides as they marched through corridors carved from ancient stone. Strange symbols covered the walls. Statues of alien heroes loomed in alcoves. The air smelled like copper and something sweet that Kate could not identify. They walked for nearly 20 minutes before reaching a massive doorway guarded by soldiers from 6 different species. Kate recognized some of them from her studies. They were there with their 4 arms and muscular bodies built like Earth gorillas but twice the size. They were present too with their serpentine forms coiled around pillars and their scales gleaming under artificial lights. There were others she did not recognize, but they all shared one thing in common. They looked at her with contempt. The doors opened, and Kate stepped into the grand chamber. It was larger than any structure she had ever seen built by human hands. The ceiling rose hundreds of feet above her head, and the walls stretched so far that the opposite end of the room seemed hazy with distance. Thousands of alien delegates sat in tiered seating that circled a central platform, where a throne made of gray stone waited in the light of a single beam from above. Kate walked to the center of the platform and stopped, stayed at the edge of the chamber as protocol demanded. She was alone now. One human woman standing before the collected representatives of civilizations that had conquered space while her ancestors were still learning to farm. In ceremonial robes rose from an elevated position above the assembly. This was High Chancellor, and Kate had memorized his face from the intelligence files. He was old even by his species standards, with cracks running through his shell and a slight tremor in his upper arms. But his voice was strong when he spoke. "The Galactic Conclave recognizes the presence of Ambassador Kate Morgan, representing the species known as humanity. You come before us seeking full membership in our alliance. You ask to stand as equals among civilizations that have existed for thousands of your years. You ask for trade rights and travel rights and military cooperation with species who conquered the void between stars before your kind discovered fire." Kate said nothing. She had been warned that the Chancellor would try to provoke her with insults. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her anger. Continued, "We have studied your species extensively. Our scientists have analyzed your biology. Our historians have reviewed your past. Our strategists have assessed your capabilities. The conclusion is unanimous." He paused for effect, and the chamber fell silent. "Humans are a tool-dependent species. You cannot survive without your machines. You cannot fight without your weapons. You cannot travel without your ships. Remove the tools and what remains: soft flesh that tears easily, brittle bones that break under pressure, eyes that cannot see in darkness, ears that cannot hear beyond a narrow range. You are biological failures who compensated for your inadequacies through clever invention." A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembly. Kate heard clicking and hissing and rumbling from a dozen different species, all expressing the same sentiment. The humans were weak. The humans were inferior. The humans did not belong among the strong. His hands curled into fists at his sides, but he kept his mouth shut. He knew that Kate had a plan, even if she had not shared all the details with him. Chancellor raised one of his arms for silence. "However, the conclave does not reject applicants without giving them a chance to prove their worth. This is our tradition, and we honor it even for species as limited as yours." Kate finally spoke. Her voice was clear and steady, and it carried through the massive chamber without amplification. "We accept the challenge." His compound eyes seemed to glitter with amusement. "You accept before knowing what the challenge involves. Either you are very brave or very foolish. Our experience suggests the latter." Kate smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I know exactly what the challenge involves: the trial of standing. 3 tests of physical capability performed without tools or technology, only what nature gave us." The Chancellor tilted his head. "You have done your research." "I have done more than research," Kate replied. "I have prepared." The assembly laughed, thousands of alien voices expressing their disbelief that any human could prepare for challenges designed to test the strongest species in the galaxy. Kate let them laugh. She had heard laughter like this before, from drill instructors who thought she would fail, from competitors who thought she would lose, from men who thought a woman could not lift what they could lift. They had all been wrong. Kate looked up at Chancellor and waited for the laughter to die. When silence returned, she asked a simple question. "When do we begin?" Chancellor descended from his elevated platform and walked toward Kate with slow, deliberate steps. His ceremonial robes dragged across the stone floor, and his compound eyes never left her face. When he reached the central platform, he stopped just 10 feet away and looked down at her with an expression that mixed curiosity with disdain. "The trial of standing has existed for 2,000 of your years," he said. "It was created to ensure that only worthy species join the conclave. 47 civilizations have attempted it. 31 have passed. 16 have failed and returned to their worlds in shame. No species has ever been injured during the trials, but no species has ever entered them as physically limited as yours." Kate kept her posture straight and her eyes locked on the Chancellor. She was acutely aware that she stood at only 5 feet and 7 inches, while he towered above her at nearly 12 feet. Her body weighed 160 pounds while his weighed over 800. By every objective measure, she was smaller and weaker and more fragile than any being in this chamber. But Kate Morgan had never believed in objective measures. "The first trial is the trial of strength," continued. He gestured toward the throne at the center of the chamber. It was carved from a single block of gray granite and covered with symbols that glowed faintly in the light from above. "The throne of founding has sat in this position for 300 years. It weighs 920 kilograms by your measurement system. To pass the first trial, you must move it from its current position to the far wall of this chamber." Kate looked at the throne. She had expected something like this. Her intelligence reports had described the trials in general terms, but the specific challenges were kept secret until the moment they were announced. A throne weighing over 2,000 pounds would be impossible for an average human to move. But Kate was not average, and she had never been average. "The rules are simple," said. "No tools of any kind, no technology, no assistance from your companion, only your own body and whatever strength nature gave you. If you cannot complete the trial, you may withdraw, and your application for membership will be without prejudice. You may return in 100 of your years to try again." A delegate stood up in the assembly and shouted something in his own language. The translator rendered it a moment later. "Why waste time with this farce? The human cannot even reach the top of the throne, let alone move it. Send them home and let us proceed with actual business." Laughter erupted again. Kate waited for it to fade. "I have a question," she said. Santini twitched. "You may ask." "The rules prohibit tools. How do you define a tool?" The Chancellor considered this for a moment. "A tool is any object used to extend or enhance natural physical capability. Levers, ropes, machines, weapons, anything that is not part of your biological form." "What about clothing?" Silence fell across the chamber. Kate saw confusion ripple through the assembly as delegates tried to understand why she was asking about clothing. Clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "Clothing is permitted. It covers your body but does not enhance your strength. It is not a tool by our definition." Kate nodded. "Good, then I am ready to begin." She turned and walked back toward who was watching with barely concealed concern on his face. He stepped forward to meet her halfway. "Kate," he said quietly, "that throne weighs a literal ton. I know you are strong, but this is insane. No human can lift that much weight." Kate removed her diplomatic jacket and handed it to him. "Hold this for me." Took the jacket automatically, but his eyes went wide when he saw what was underneath. Kate wore a standard gray undershirt that hugged her body tightly, and that body was not what anyone expected from a diplomat. Years of military training had built the foundation, but it was the decade after her service that had transformed her into something extraordinary. Kate had discovered powerlifting at the age of 28, and she had pursued it with the same intensity that she brought to everything else in her life. She had trained 6 days a week. She had studied nutrition and recovery and biomechanics. She had competed in championships and set records and pushed her body to limits that most humans never approached. Her shoulders were broad and thick with muscle. Her arms were not bulky, but they were dense with power that came from thousands of hours of lifting heavy iron. Her back flared wide from her waist, and the muscles there moved visibly beneath her shirt as she rolled her shoulders. Her legs were hidden by her uniform pants, but knew from experience that they were her greatest strength. Kate could squat over 500 pounds without assistance. But could she lift a throne that weighed 4 times that much? Kate saw the doubt in his eyes and she smiled. The aliens studied human averages. They looked at our typical strength and our typical endurance and our typical capabilities. They never bothered to study what happens when a human dedicates their entire life to becoming exceptional. She turned and walked back toward the throne. The assembly watched in confused silence as this small human woman approached a challenge that should have been impossible for her species. Kate stopped in front of the throne and examined it closely. It was wide at the base with a high back decorated with carved symbols. The stone was smooth from centuries of polishing. She circled it slowly, looking for the best grip points and the optimal angle for the lift. Chancellor watched with his compound eyes, tracking her every movement. "You have 1 hour to complete the trial. The time begins when you first touch the throne." Kate nodded without looking at him. She was focused entirely on the task ahead. Everything else faded away. The thousands of alien delegates, the massive chamber, the weight of humanity's future resting on her shoulders. None of it mattered now. There was only the stone and her body and the simple question of whether she could do what needed to be done. She crouched beside the throne and placed her hands on the base. The stone was cold against her palms and rougher than it looked. She adjusted her grip until she found positions that felt secure. Then she set her feet. Kate had learned long ago that all great lifts begin with the feet. The foundation determines everything. She positioned herself with her feet slightly wider than shoulder width and her toes pointed slightly outward. She pressed her heels into the stone floor and felt the solid surface beneath her. She breathed in slowly and filled her lungs with air. She tightened her core and felt her abdominal muscles lock into place like armor around her spine. She pulled her shoulder blades together and created tension across her entire upper back. The assembly was absolutely silent now. Even the who had mocked her earlier was leaning forward with all four hands gripping the railing in front of him. Kate closed her eyes and thought about everyone who had ever told her what she could not do. Her father who said women belonged at home. Her first sergeant who said she was too small for combat roles. Her competitors who said she would never set records. The alien reports that said humans were weak without their tools. She opened her eyes and looked at the throne. Then she began to lift. The stone did not move at first. Kate felt the resistance through her entire body as she pushed against gravity and the terrible weight of the throne. Her legs burned with effort. Her back strained against forces that would have broken most humans. Her grip tightened until her knuckles went white and her forearms shook with tension. She had lifted heavy weights before. She had set records in competitions where the strongest humans in the world gathered to test themselves. But this was different. This was not a barbell designed for human hands. This was ancient alien stone carved by creatures who did not understand or care about human limitations. Kate pushed harder. The assembly watched in complete silence. Thousands of aliens from dozens of species sat frozen in their seats as this small human woman attempted the impossible. Chancellor stood with his arms folded across his chest and his compound eyes fixed on the scene before him. He had seen many species attempt the trial of strength. He had never seen one struggle so hard. Cole stood at the edge of the chamber with his hands clenched into fists. He wanted to help. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to run forward and add his strength to hers. But the rules were clear. No assistance. Kate had to do this alone or not at all. The throne shifted. It was barely perceptible at first, just a tiny movement that could have been imagined. But then it happened again, and again. The massive stone block began to rise from the floor where it had sat unmoved for 300 years. Kate felt the change in weight distribution and adjusted her position. This was the critical moment, the transition from static resistance to dynamic movement. If she lost her grip now, the throne would crash back down and she would have to start over. She could not afford to waste energy on failed attempts. She breathed out sharply and drove her legs upward. The throne rose. 6 inches, 12 inches, 18 inches. The base of the ancient stone cleared the floor and Kate held it suspended in the air with nothing but her own muscle and bone and determination. Her legs were fully extended now. Her arms were locked at her sides, gripping the stone with fingers that had turned red from pressure. A gasp rippled through the assembly. The delegate who had mocked her earlier made a sound like choking, and his 4 arms fell limp at his sides. The representative uncoiled slightly and rose higher to get a better view. Even Chancellor took an involuntary step backward. This was not supposed to happen. Their scientists had analyzed human biology. They had calculated the maximum force that human muscles could generate. They had determined that no human could lift more than a few hundred kilograms without assistance. The throne weighed more than 900. Their calculations had been wrong. Kate was not thinking about calculations. She was not thinking about the aliens watching her or the weight of humanity's future. She was thinking only about the next step. The trial required her to move the throne across the chamber. Standing in place with it lifted was not enough. She had to walk. She shifted her weight carefully onto her right leg. Then she lifted her left foot and placed it forward. 1 step. The throne swayed slightly, but she compensated by tightening her grip and adjusting her balance. She brought her right foot forward to meet her left. Another step and another. Kate Morgan walked across the grand chamber of the Galactic Conclave, carrying over 2,000 pounds of solid granite with her naked hands. The distance to the far wall was approximately 60 meters. That was roughly 200 feet. Kate moved slowly but steadily, covering the ground one step at a time. Her muscles screamed with effort. Sweat ran down her face and dripped onto the stone floor beneath her feet. Every breath came in sharp, controlled bursts that kept her core tight and her spine protected. 30 meters. Was grinning now despite his earlier concern. He had seen Kate lift before, but never anything like this. She was proving something that went beyond physical strength. She was proving that human potential could not be measured by averages and calculations. 40 meters. The assembly had begun to murmur. Delegates spoke to each other in hushed voices that the translators could not quite catch. Kate heard fragments of conversation. Words like impossible and error and recalculate drifted through the air. The aliens were trying to understand what they were seeing. They were trying to reconcile their assumptions about humans with the reality walking before them. 50 meters. Kate could see the far wall clearly now. It was carved from the same stone as the rest of the chamber and decorated with symbols that matched those on the throne. This was where generations of species had placed the throne after completing the first trial. This was where she would place it too. 55 meters. Her legs were shaking now, not from weakness but from the sustained effort of carrying a weight that should have crushed her. Every muscle fiber in her body was engaged. Every nerve was firing signals of protest and pain. But Kate had learned long ago to ignore pain. Pain was just information. It told you where your limits were. It did not tell you that you had to stop. 60 meters. Kate reached the wall and stopped. She took one final breath and then lowered the throne with controlled precision. The base touched the floor without a sound. She released her grip and stepped back, and the throne of founding stood in its new position exactly where it needed to be. Only then did Kate allow herself to feel the exhaustion. Her arms hung at her sides and trembled visibly. Her legs felt like they might collapse beneath her. Her heart pounded in her chest so hard that she could feel it in her temples. But she did not fall. She stood straight and turned to face the assembly. The silence stretched for a long moment. Then Chancellor began to click his mandibles in a rhythm that Kate's translator identified as applause. Other species joined in with their own forms of approval. The stomped their feet. The hissed in unison. Within seconds, the entire chamber was filled with sound as thousands of aliens acknowledged what they had just witnessed. Kate walked slowly back toward the center of the chamber. Her body ached with every step, but she kept her posture straight and her expression calm. She would not show weakness now, not when she had just demonstrated strength that none of them had believed possible. Met her halfway with her jacket in his hands. His face was split by the widest grin she had ever seen from him. "That was incredible," he said quietly. Kate took the jacket but did not put it on. "That was just the first trial. There are 2 more. His grin faded slightly. "Do you know what they are?" Kate shook her head. "Not exactly, but it does not matter. Whatever they throw at me, I will find a way to win." She turned to face Chancellor, who had returned to the central platform. The alien leader was looking at her with an expression that might have been respect, or it might have been fear. Kate could not tell the difference. "The first trial is complete," announced. "The human has demonstrated strength beyond our expectations. The second trial will begin tomorrow at dawn. She will need time to recover." Kate stepped forward. "I do not need time. I am ready now." The assembly fell silent again, tilted his head. "You wish to continue immediately, after what you just accomplished?" Kate nodded. "I came here to prove that humans belong in the conclave. I will not stop until that is done." Was silent for a long moment. Then he clicked his mandibles in what Kate's translator identified as laughter. "Very well. The second trial begins now." Floor beneath Kate's feet began to change. The solid stone cracked and split apart as massive sections descended into darkness below. A new surface rose to take its place. This one was covered with obstacles, walls of varying heights, pits filled with something that glowed a faint blue, climbing structures made of polished metal that reflected the lights from above. Chancellor gestured toward the transformed arena with one of his four arms. The second trial is the trial of endurance. You must cross this course from one end to the other without stopping. You may climb over obstacles or go around them, but you may not pause. If you stop moving for more than 5 of your seconds, you will fail. Kate studied the course. It stretched at least 300 meters from where she stood to the far end of the chamber. The obstacles were designed for species much larger than humans. Some of the walls rose 20 feet high with no visible handholds. The pits were too wide to jump across. The climbing structures were spaced far apart, requiring long reaches that would challenge even the tallest athletes. But Kate had trained for obstacles her entire military career. She had completed courses that broke other Marines. She had pushed through pain and exhaustion and every voice in her head that told her to stop. This was different in scale but not in kind. "You have one chance," continued. "If you fail, you may not retry. Do you understand?" Kate nodded without speaking. She was already planning her route through the course, already calculating distances and angles and the most efficient paths forward. Step close to her. "Kate, you just carried 2,000 pounds across this chamber. Your muscles must be destroyed. You need to rest." Kate shook her head. "If I rest, they will think I needed to rest. They will think the first trial was my limit. I have to show them that I can do more." She handed him her jacket again. Then she walked to the starting line and waited. Raised one arm. "The trial begins when I lower my arm. May your body prove sufficient." Kate focused on the first obstacle, a wall that rose 15 feet with a slight incline on the front face. She would need to run at it with enough speed to climb the incline and grab the top, then pull herself over and drop to the other side. Simple in concept, brutal in execution. The Chancellor's arm came down. Kate ran. Her legs burned from the throne carry, but she ignored the pain and pushed forward. She hit the inclined wall at full speed and let her momentum carry her up the face. Her feet found traction on the rough surface. Her hands reached for the top edge and found it. She pulled herself up and over in one smooth motion and dropped to the ground on the other side without breaking stride. The assembly watched in silence as the human woman attacked the course with relentless energy. The second obstacle was a series of raised platforms spaced 6 feet apart. Too far for a normal human to jump, but Kate had trained for this exact kind of movement. She leaped from platform to platform using her arms for balance and her legs for power. Each landing sent shockwaves of pain through her exhausted muscles, but she did not slow down. She could not slow down. Stopping meant failure. The third obstacle was a pit filled with the glowing blue substance. Kate did not know what it was, and she did not want to find out. The pit was 12 feet wide with no way around it. The only option was a series of thin metal bars suspended above the liquid. Kate grabbed the first bar and swung forward. Her grip was weaker than normal from the strain of carrying the throne, but she held on. She swung to the second bar, then the third, then the fourth. Her right hand slipped on the fifth bar. Kate felt her fingers lose contact with the smooth metal, and for one terrible moment she hung in the air with nothing beneath her but the glowing pit. Her left hand tightened on the fourth bar. Her right arm swung wildly until she caught the fifth bar again with a grip so tight that she felt her tendons strain against the bone. She kept moving. The assembly had begun to make sounds that might have been encouragement or might have been disbelief. Kate could not tell, and she did not care. All that mattered was the next obstacle, then the one after that, then the one after that. A climbing structure rose before her made of polished metal poles arranged in a complex pattern. Kate grabbed the lowest pole and began to climb. Her arms screamed with every pull. Her legs pushed against poles that were smooth and slippery. She slipped twice and caught herself twice and kept climbing until she reached the top platform 30 feet above the floor. From here she could see the rest of the course. There were at least 10 more obstacles between her and the finish line. Walls and pits and structures that seemed designed to break anyone who attempted them. Kate did not hesitate. She jumped from the platform to a rope that hung from the ceiling and slid down to the next section of the course. The pain was constant now. Every muscle in her body was firing signals of distress. Her lungs burned with effort. Her heart pounded so hard that she could hear it in her ears. But Kate had pushed through pain before. She had finished marathons with stress fractures in her feet. She had completed training courses with broken ribs. Pain was just the body's way of telling you that you were still alive. She vaulted over a low wall. She crawled under a barrier of metal spikes. She climbed another structure and jumped to another rope and swung across another pit. The obstacles blurred together into a continuous stream of movement and effort and determination. Watched from the edge of the course with his hands pressed against his temples. He had seen Kate push herself before, but never like this. She was operating on pure willpower now. Her body should have failed 10 obstacles ago, but somehow she kept going. The finish line came into view, a simple metal arch at the far end of the course. Kate was 50 meters away, then 40, then 30. Her legs buckled on the 20-meter mark. Kate stumbled and nearly fell. Her vision went gray at the edges and her breath came in ragged gasps. The 5-second countdown began in her mind. 5 seconds before failure. 5 seconds before everything she had accomplished meant nothing. She took a step, then another. Her legs were barely functional now. They shook with every movement and threatened to collapse with every step, but she kept moving, step by step, meter by meter, closer and closer to the finish line. 10 meters. Kate could see the metal arch clearly now. It was polished silver and inscribed with the same symbols that covered the throne. Beyond it was the wall of the chamber. Beyond that was nothing. Just the end of the trial. Just the goal she had been working toward. 5 meters. Her right leg gave out and Kate crashed to the ground. The stone hit her knees and palms with brutal force. Pain exploded through her body. The countdown started again. 5, 4, 3. Kate pushed herself up with arms that had no strength left. She got one foot under her, then the other. She took one final step and crossed under the metal arch just as the countdown reached 1. The trial was complete. Kate collapsed on the other side of the finish line and lay on her back staring up at the distant ceiling. Her chest heaved with exhausted breaths. Her entire body trembled from the effort. She had never pushed herself this hard in her entire life. But she had won. The assembly erupted into sounds of approval that echoed through the massive chamber, sprinted across the course toward her, ignoring the obstacles completely. When he reached her, he dropped to his knees and helped her sit up. "You did it," he said, his voice cracked with emotion. "Kate, you did it." Kate smiled weakly. "One more trial, then we are done." Looked at her with concern. "You cannot do another trial. Look at yourself. You can barely move." Kate took his hand and pulled herself to her feet. Her legs shook, but they held. Her arms hung at her sides, but they still worked. She was damaged and exhausted and pushed beyond any reasonable limit. But she was not finished. "I told them I would prove that humans belong here," she said. "I am not stopping until that is done." She turned to face Chancellor, who was watching from the central platform, with an expression that had changed completely from the contempt he had shown before. "What is the third trial?" Kate asked. Was silent for a long moment. Then he bowed his head in a gesture that Kate recognized as respect. "The third trial," he said quietly, "is the trial of will, and I am beginning to think you have already passed it." Obstacle course descended back into the floor, and the original stone surface rose to take its place. Kate stood at the center of the chamber once again, with at her side and thousands of alien eyes watching her every movement. Her body ached in ways she had never experienced before. Her muscles had been pushed past every reasonable limit. Her joints throbbed with pain from impacts and strain, but she was still standing, and that was what mattered. Chancellor approached her slowly. His compound eyes studied her with an intensity that felt almost clinical. He was trying to understand what he was seeing, trying to reconcile his assumptions about humans with the reality standing before him. "The trial of will is different from the others," he said. "It does not test strength or endurance. It tests something deeper, something that cannot be measured with instruments or calculated with equations." Kate waited in silence for him to continue. "You will be presented with a choice," explained. "A scenario that tests your commitment to your species, your willingness to sacrifice for those who come after you. There is no physical challenge involved, only your own mind and heart." He gestured toward a section of the floor that began to glow with soft light. A holographic projection appeared in the air above it. The image showed Earth. Kate's. The blue and green sphere hung in the darkness of space, looking small and fragile and beautiful. "Your species is young," said. "You have only recently discovered faster than light travel. You do not yet have the technology to defend yourselves against the threats that exist in this galaxy. There are species who would destroy you simply because you exist. Species who would enslave you for labor. Species who would consume your resources and leave your world a lifeless rock." The holographic image changed to show a fleet of alien ships approaching Earth. Kate recognized the designs from her intelligence briefings. These were vessels. They were a predatory species that had conquered and destroyed over 30 worlds in the past century. They were not members of the Conclave. They were considered enemies by most of the civilized galaxy. "The Conclave has protected many young species from threats like the," continued. "We have fleets stationed throughout the galaxy that can respond to attacks within hours. If humanity becomes a member, we will extend this protection to your world. Your people will be safe." Kate nodded slowly. "And if we fail the trials?" Was silent for a moment. "If you fail the trials, humanity will not receive membership. You will not receive our protection. If they choose to attack your world, you will be alone." The weight of those words settled on Kate's shoulders. She had known the stakes were high. She had known that failure meant more than personal embarrassment, but hearing it stated so plainly made the reality impossible to ignore. "The choice before you is simple," said. "You may complete the trial of will and secure humanity's place in the Conclave, or you may withdraw from the trials entirely. Both options will be accepted without judgment." Kate frowned. "That is not much of a choice. Why would anyone withdraw after coming this far?" Clicked his mandibles in a pattern that suggested discomfort. "The trial of will requires you to acknowledge something about your species, something that many find difficult to accept." He raised one arm and the holographic image changed again. Now it showed humans throughout history, cave dwellers hunting with primitive spears, farmers working fields with wooden tools, soldiers fighting with swords and shields, scientists building telescopes and microscopes, astronauts walking on the moon, engineers constructing spacecraft. "Your species achieved everything you have through tools," said. "That is not an insult. It is a statement of fact. Without tools, you would still be living in caves. Without tools, you would never have reached the stars. The trial of will requires you to acknowledge this truth publicly before the entire conclave." Kate understood now. The trial was designed to humiliate species who relied on technology. It forced them to admit their biological limitations in front of civilizations that had achieved greatness through natural evolution. It was a test of pride, a test of whether a species could accept criticism and still believe in themselves. Stepped forward with anger on his face. "This is ridiculous." Kate just lifted a 2,000-pound throne with her bare hands. She just completed an obstacle course that would have killed most humans. She has proven that humans are not weak. Turned to face him. She has proven that some humans are exceptional, But one exceptional individual does not define a species. The question is whether humanity as a whole can accept its nature and still choose to move forward. Kate placed a hand on his arm to calm him. Then she stepped forward and looked up at Chancellor. "You want me to acknowledge that humans needed tools to become what we are," she said. "That without our inventions we would be nothing special. That our strength comes from our minds rather than our bodies." Nodded, "Yes, that is what the trial of will requires." Kate smiled. It was not a smile of defeat or embarrassment. It was a smile of understanding. "You are right," she said. Her voice carried through the chamber and reached every delegate in the assembly. Humans needed tools. We needed fire to survive cold nights. We needed spears to hunt animals stronger than ourselves. We needed ships to cross oceans and rockets to reach the stars. Everything we have accomplished came from our ability to imagine solutions and build them with our hands. The assembly was silent. Chancellor watched her with an unreadable expression. "But you made a mistake," Kate continued. "You assumed that needing tools meant we were weak. You thought our dependence on technology proved our biological inferiority. You never considered the truth." She walked toward the throne that she had carried across the chamber earlier. It still sat in its new position against the far wall. She placed her hand on the cold stone and turned back to face the assembly. "Creating tools is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of extraordinary strength. The strength to imagine what does not exist. The strength to build what has never been built. The strength to look at the universe and say that things can be different." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "You judge species by what they are born with. We judge ourselves by what we choose to become. And we chose to become more than our biology allowed. We chose to become inventors and builders and explorers. We chose to reach for the stars even though our bodies were not designed for space." Kate walked back to the center of the chamber and stood directly before Chancellor. "I acknowledge that humans needed tools to become what we are. I accept this truth proudly, because our tools did not make us weak. They made us limitless." The silence stretched for a long moment. Then Chancellor did something that Kate had never seen in any intelligence briefing or cultural analysis. He knelt. The 12-foot being lowered himself until his compound eyes were level with Kate's. His ceremonial robes pooled around him on the floor. His antennae drooped in a gesture of submission. "The trial of will is complete," he said quietly. "Humanity has passed all 3 trials. You are now full members of the Galactic Conclave." The assembly erupted into sound. Delegates from every species rose to their feet and expressed approval in their own ways. The stomped and roared. The hissed and swayed. Others clicked and chirped and made sounds that Kate's translator could not identify. Appeared at her side with tears in his eyes. He did not say anything. He just put his arm around her shoulders and held her as she finally allowed herself to feel the magnitude of what she had accomplished. Chancellor rose to his feet and looked down at Kate with something that might have been admiration. "You were right," he said. "We made a mistake. We measured your species by what you were born with. We should have measured you by what you are willing to become." Kate nodded. Her body was destroyed. Her muscles would take weeks to recover. She would feel the pain of this day for months. But none of that mattered. Humanity had claimed its place among the stars, not because they were the strongest, not because they were the fastest, not because they were the most naturally gifted, but because they refused to accept limits. And that made all the difference.